Today, as we start our sermon moment today, I brought this glass. This is a glass of lemonade. I love lemonade, and I hope that you do too. But I wanted to start today asking just a simple question. When you look at this glass of lemonade, do you see it as half empty or half full? I really think I just brought the lemonade so that I could sip it as we work. But I want you to see it. Half empty or half full. If you're a half kind of full person, people would often call you an optimist, right? Where you can live with this moment of expectation of pouring more lemonade into the glass. Maybe you sweeten it just a little bit or not enough, but you have this air of expectation. You look at this glass and you think, I can't wait for there to be more lemonade in it. Or if you look at this glass and you're one of those half-empty people, you may say, that glass, she's drinking it down, it's going to be gone soon. We just know that this is going to happen. There's nothing we can do about it. This half empty. And the world might call you a pessimist. Now, I think most pessimists would be a little bit offended by this. I think they might just call themselves realists, looking at the real world. But there are two ways of being in the world today. We can certainly be both of them at the same time. For many of us, we are both optimists and pessimists. Or realists. It just kind of depends on the time and the space and the situation. But the question I have for you today is not about optimism or pessimism. It's about how would God want us to be in the world? What would God expect us of our behavior? I think that pessimism is not something that Christians often succumb to because for a simple fact that we profess to believe in a God who created us and defeated death with the resurrection. It's hard to be a pessimist all of the time as our worldview with that in mind. That doesn't mean we don't have moments of pessimism. But we can't live only in optimism either, because optimism can often come out of a place of naivety, ignoring the actual world around us. Artificial optimism can be born out of a people's desire to see goodwill come to every situation. They can only survive if more lemonade is coming. And I'm not sure how this is that God would want us to operate either, because it leaves out and up to question a lot of difficult life circumstances. So if neither half full or half empty attitudes are exactly right, what does God have for us today? What is hope in this world of biblical hope? We get a hint from this in our passage from Colossians. The writer of Colossians, which some say is Paul, and some say it happened after Paul, but was written with Paul in mind. The writer of Colossians says in the opening, in this verse, "In our prayer for you, we will always thank God, the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, for we have heard of your faith in Christ Jesus, and of the love that you have for all saints, because of the hope laid up for you in heaven. You have heard of this hope before in the word of truth, the gospel that has come to you." So Paul, though never meeting the Colossians, writes to them to encourage and correct them. And he begins his communication in a similar way that he begins all of his communications, with a prayer of thanksgiving. For the Colossians, Paul is encouraged by their faith, for their love of all people, and hope. In fact, he uses this word hope 3 times in the first chapter. Hope laid up in heaven. Hope before in the world of truth, the gospel that has come to you. Hope is what we're all about here today. For it is the first Sunday of Advent where people around the world are talking about this idea of hope and what is hope. And so I want to look at this concept, and more importantly, I want to think, how does the Bible define hope? But before we get there, 3 years ago, we hired a video company to make a series of videos for Advent. And these videos looked at what hope, love, joy, and peace meant to our children. And today, as a special treat, I wanted to play the video about hope so we could see what some of our children's thoughts about hope were, or at least what they were 3 years ago. Let's watch.
Do it over here, and you and I are...
What do you think? That's a tough one. Yeah. What do you think hope means?
Hope? Like, I don't know how to put it into words, I don't know.
Thankful.
Hope means where you really want something. For Christmas, I hope for a hoverboard.
I'm hoping for the American Girl, Logan.
And Alexa. I hope for a guinea pig.
Yeah.
Because I have 2 pets, or actually 3 pets, 2 dogs and a cat that would usually, hunt down and maybe, eat a guinea pig or something. But I've always wanted a guinea pig. Yeah, I hope for a guinea pig. Hope means to say I can do it in your brain.
Hope is when you want something to happen. I hope that my grandma gets better.
Hope means I hope no one is lonely or something on Christmas.
Like having hope in somebody like you really, really want.
I hope that I can finish 2nd grade.
I hope for a good Friendsgiving tomorrow at my school. To see my cousins over Thanksgiving. I hope that my grandparents are coming down for Thanksgiving on Tuesday because my grandma and grandpa are coming down.
Yeah. Do you love your grandma and grandpa?
Hope to these cuties was toys, and it was Christmas, and it was family visiting. This anticipation and excitement certainly does define hope for many people. But it is hope in a thing, a toy, or a new pet, or hope for a visit at Christmas or Thanksgiving, hope for a sick relative to feel better. Many of us are familiar with this kind of hope. We might hope for a good parking space when we get to church. We might hope for no traffic as we drive through Yulee or wherever you live. We might hope for a raise at work or a peaceful night at home. In this way, hope and optimism are very similar. This kind of optimistic hope is choosing to look at any situation and choosing to see how the good can come from it. This is a good thing. It is a good thing to live with expectation, and excitement is a basic human reaction. It's good for our souls. However, it is ultimately fleeting and not sustaining. The things that we hope for, will eventually break or wear out, like many of the toys that the kids hoped for just 3 years ago. We all know that we can hope for family to visit and peaceful nights at home, but they will not always happen. We can also see where optimism will not sustain us always through difficult times. In fact, think back over the last several years. There are many life situations and world situations that leave no room for optimism. School shootings, people dying from COVID, death from war, starvation, and I could go on and on and on. We can see situations like this and think, where is God? How am I to hope? I am too weary to hope. This feeling is understandable. But before we hang our heads and give in to this overwhelming fear of weariness, I want to look back at our passage from Isaiah that we read at the top of our service today and see if within that we can catch a glimmer of biblical hope. If you remember your Old Testament prophet history that we learned earlier this summer, if you've been with us, you will remember that Isaiah was a prophet about halfway through the kingdom period of the Israelite history. When he came onto the scene, there had been about 250 years where kings had come and gone from the throne, and for the most part, many of them were not such good kings, and neither were their people. They had turned their backs on God and the covenant that the Israelites had made with God. When we open our passage today, Isaiah is talking in verse 1, which we'll put on the screen now, about a time period in history that was recorded in 2 Kings chapter 15, when Assyria, the opposing kingdom, came into the Israelite area of Galilee and destroyed it. Not only did they destroy it, but they took all of their people, the children, the aunts, the uncles, the moms, the dads, the grandmas, the grandpas, all of them, and they deported them from their land. These people had gone through a terrible time, as Isaiah is beginning to prophesy, being ripped from their homes, taken from their families and their lives destroyed. And Isaiah 9, chapter 2, describes it like a light being turned off in their lives, the people who walked in great darkness. And then it says, those who have lived in a land of deep darkness, as if someone came into their life and just turned the light switch off. And it goes on and it says, and then I begin to think that they're wondering, where is God in all of this darkness? Why did God abandon us? I'm sure they are praying and wondering, why does God not seem to hear their prayers? The passage continues to go on to say in verse 4, of there being a burden as heavy as a yoke being that U-shaped object that connects horses or cattle as they pull a trailer, that this is how heavy their burden is. And so in this bit of prophetic poetry that Isaiah is describing, these people have this heaviness. Can you feel that heaviness? Have you ever felt it before? And you may be wondering, I thought we were going to talk about hope, Pastor Carrie, about biblical hope. And I'm glad that you asked that, because I would say I actually already gave you a glimmer of this hope. Did you catch it? Let's put verse 2 back on the screen. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who lived in the land of deep darkness, on them light has shined. This prophetic poetry that Isaiah has written says that the people, they did walk in darkness. This is a fact. But that they have seen a great light. That those in deep darkness, that a light is going to be turned on for them. And you keep reading, verse 3, it says, you have been multiplied and you have increased in joy. They rejoice before you as the joy at the harvest, as people exult when dividing plunder. Can you picture these people who have gathered a large harvest and now they're dividing up all of their spoils? The joy on their faces. Through verse 4 and 5, you can see this happiness building as you read this prophetic poetry. And yet the prophet has still not told us. Okay, Isaiah, you can say, we know there are these people that are walking now in darkness, and you're telling us that a light is coming, that it will be more joyful, but how and what and where do we see that? And then Isaiah gets to this climactic verses of 6 and 7, ones that if you have been in the church for many years, or even just 1 year, you have heard this passage before at Christmas time. It says, for a child has been born to us, a son given to us, and authority rests upon his shoulder. He is named Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Great will be his authority. And there shall be endless peace for the throne of David and his kingdom. He will establish and uphold it with justice and righteousness for this time onward and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. This is it. Isaiah says that light that will be turned back on, the joy that they will feel, will come in the form of a child being born, a son that will become to be known Everlasting Father and Mighty God, and authority will rest solely on his shoulders. We learn about this child that he will come and his reign will bring endless peace, and it will establish how to hold up with justice and righteousness for all people of all time. This is the glimmer of hope that we're looking for. The hope when things seem bleak and mild, when the lights are turned out and the yoke of burden is heavy. Now, what those people didn't know, that we know now, is that child that Isaiah is talking about was who? Who was it? Jesus. Of course it was Jesus. Christians for years and years have been reading this passage and knew that it pointed back to Jesus, that hope that Isaiah prophesied about did come 700 years later, but it came. In fact, near the very same place that the Assyrians plundered and deported all of the people, in that same place, the child did come. In doing my research for today's sermon, I came upon a series on biblical hope by Tim Mackey, who's the creator of the Bible Project, which by far is the best, hands down, Christian education resource that I know. But in reflecting on this biblical hope, he makes this statement. Biblical hope is based on a person, which makes it different from optimism. Optimism is about choosing to see in any situation how circumstances could work out for the best. But biblical hope isn't focused on circumstances. In fact, hopeful people in the Bible often recognize that there's no evidence that things will get better, but you choose hope anyway. The people in Isaiah's time and throughout the Old Testament modeled this biblical hope. Yes, there of course are complaints and petitions for their situations to get better, and that is fine and good. We have those as well, and that will never stop. But there was a level of hope that ran deeper, a biblical hope, a constant rhythmic reminder of a practice of remembering all that God had done in their lives and the promise that God would always be with them. Throughout the scriptures, if we have read them, people come up on hardships, or they have trouble in their lives, and a person stops the narrative and reminds the people all that God has done for them. This happens over and over and over as early back in as Genesis. And this continues throughout all of Scripture to today. This rhythmic reminder of God's ever-present nature is followed by the people of God putting their trust and their hope in who God was, is, and promises to be, as opposed to putting their hope in their circumstances. And this continues into the New Testament. When the gospel writer told the story of Jesus' ministry, you can tell that he had in mind Isaiah chapter 9, because in fact, he quotes from it in chapter 4, verses 15 and 16, reminding the people that God, through Isaiah, had promised them a child who would be mighty God among them. And Matthew is helping the people remember that God is with them now. This biblical hope, this pointing to who God is and how God is working in our lives, continues throughout the New Testament and into our passage from Colossians today. I brought it full circle for you. In our passage today, the first 14 verses, hope is mentioned twice. We'll put those back on the screen. Hope being laid up in heaven, and hope from the world of truth, the gospel that has come to you. These ideas that hope is bigger than our lives and who we are. And then later, I told you it happened one more time in chapter 1, verse 27, where it's described as Christ living in you, the hope of glory. This hope, this word biblical hope, is looking to God as an ever-present movement in our lives and in our world, even when it is hard to see. Hope is acknowledging that the same Jesus that was prophesied long ago and was born 700 years later is the same one to die on the cross for us and then defeating death raised for us again. This hope is biblical hope. But what do we do with that for today? How do we have hope for today when our world can be so bleak? Here in this state, we live in a place where 2 tropical storms have hit our borders in just less than a month. People have lost everything, many including their lives. And we here on Amelia Island and in Yulee can say thank you because for the most part, the storm passed us by. But what about the people that are dealing with grief not far from here, who are spending their holidays rebuilding their lives? Where is God to them? Or where is God when during this season when teenagers are getting unfair health diagnoses and where people are suffering from mental illness? The list goes on and on and on. Where is hope? How do we have hope, this biblical view of hope in this real world? We are calling this Advent season, this series, a real world Advent. And today we want to talk about how do we have real world hope. And I want to close today by telling you one story. A story about real world hope that happened here just last week. We have a women's circle in our church that noticed many months ago the needs of the hungry in our community. They had this righteousness and justice burning in them, and they wanted to do something. And they decided that with lots of months of planning and prep and building, that they would set up a little pantry outside of our office building in the parking lot by our playground where it can be seen by all. And they filled it with food, and it sat waiting on a sign to tell the world that it was free for anyone who needed it. And as it waited, Hurricane Ian rolled in, and it took down the pantry and all of the food that was in it. Gone. And for a moment, I am sure that there was these thoughts in these women's minds of, where is God? I can imagine that they're saying, God, we put this up for you and your people. Why did it have to go? Why did you do this? Why did you not protect the pantry that was doing good? And then maybe they were wondering, well, should we even put it back up? What if there's another storm? What are we going to do then? But that group of women, with their eyes pointed to biblical hope and the call that God had placed in their lives to care for the hungry in our neighborhood, they put it back up and they began to make plans to fill it with food again. But before they could, I got a phone call. On Sunday afternoon, I got a text from a church member, Matthew Fry, asking if anyone could put food in the food pantry, or was there anyone scheduled to do that? And I said, yes, of course, anybody can put it in there. And my thought was, well, maybe he had a little bit in his car and he was going to just put it in there. Little did I know that as he dropped his son off here at the church for one of our kids' programs, he went straight to Walmart that afternoon. And he says he walked up and down the aisles of Walmart putting food into his cart. And a woman stopped him in the store, and she struck up a conversation about the food that he was buying and asked him if he was going to eat all of this shelf-stable food, because there was quite a lot in his cart. And he told her about the little food pantry here at our property. And she commented how amazing that was, and then off she went. Matthew continued on about his shopping, and a little while later, as he was filling his cart, she came up to him again. And this time she had a $20 bill in her hand. She gave it to Matthew, and she said, use this to buy some of the food. As Matthew left the store that day, he got in his car and he immediately called me. He said, I just have to tell someone what happened. He relayed this story to me, and I could hear the excitement in his voice about the entire encounter. He told me in that phone call that he went to the store that day to fill the pantry after hearing Justin and the youth group talking about participating in a recent weekend where they focused on learning about food insecurity and hunger. He was inspired to do something, to embody hope in our community. Friends, this whole event, from beginning to end, the idea of the food pantry to encountering the woman at the Walmart, is all how God is working among us. God didn't cause Hurricane Ian to take away the food pantry. No, but God worked through the circle, through Matthew, through the youth group and the woman in Walmart, to show us all an example of God at work among us. Life will be hard. We can never avoid that. But God will show us every single time that God is with us. Emmanuel, a word you hear a lot at Advent, in fact means God with us. Jesus came to teach us about life, to teach us to care for others, to be his hands and feet here in our world. And each and every time we embody God where we are, where we embody God's hope and light in the darkness, we are bringing biblical hope to the people around us. We are remembering all that God has done for us, and we are proclaiming that for the world to see. So as you go on with your day today, I want you to be thinking about real world hope. And I want you to be thinking about, how is God working in your lives? How is God showing you that God is there even in the most difficult of times? And how can you point other people to God's real world hope here today? Because the world may be bleak and it may feel dark, but God is here with us. And we, you and me, can have hope in that. Amen. Another way that we actively participate in our worship service here in the digital community is with some questions. I already gave you a hint of those questions at the end of the sermon, and we're going to put them back on the screen for you, and I encourage you to take some time now to reflect on these for your own life.